Welcome to a special edition of Short is the New Long, where we ask authors to read their own works in their own words.
Hello there, my name's Rob Edwards, and today I'm going to be reading for you a short story, or the start of a short story anyway, called The Lords of Negative Space. It's quite an old story. I wrote this even before I started trying to be a writer. So in the last 5 or 6 years I've had a dozen short stories published, and I've just published my first novel. But this story actually predates all of that. Back when I was just hobby writing, because I love writing. And I have read this short story, in fact, in full, on my own podcast, Storycast Rob. I don't know if I'm allowed to plug my own podcast, but I just did. Apologies if I wasn't supposed to. The whole story takes about an hour to read. So I'm going to read about 15-20 minutes of it for you today, just to give you a taste of it. And if you want to see more of it, you can look up episode 5 of my podcast, Storycast Rob, or you can find it in print format in the Inklings Press anthology, Tales from the Underground. It actually started life as a writing exercise. My go-to writing is dialogue. I love writing dialogue. I love writing close third person. I love writing first person. I love getting the voice of the character on the page. And I wanted to start this by posing myself the challenge of delaying as long as possible as I could in my story any dialogue tags at all. Now, I kind of cheated in the end because I've written this, in fact, in third person omniscient, and so there is the voice of a narrator here. But I don't know, I still really like the way it came out. And third person omniscient is not the easiest thing in the world to write well anyway. Did I pull it off? I'll let you be the judge. So here we go. The Lords of Negative Space by Rob Edwards. In the time before, in a world less known, they were. In the wilds where humans rightly feared to venture, they moved. In the darkest heart of every forest, in the misty unknown of every moor and valley, on the mysterious slopes of every mountain, and in the endless night of every cave, they played. They were beautiful and terrible, cunning and playful, capricious and powerful. They existed. Creatures born of thought and superstition, they existed not as a stone or tree does, solid and heavy in the world, but in the way that love does, overwhelming and true and so very painful. They were the unknown and unknowable, creatures defined by a lack of definition. And so we named them. Fae, she, ogre, fairy, goblin, tales were told around the fire in the late dark of the night, and we knew to fear those places they lived and the creatures who dwelled there. And so they grew in power, for they were beings of imagination. And yet, even as their power grew, they found themselves constrained. The wilds became known. This valley became farmland, this hilltop a village, this forest the king's hunting ground. The untamed land was threaded with tracks, with roads, with railways, and every house, every field, every map and photograph, every pylon and GPS signal, each and every one cut away at their power. There are no fairies at the bottom of your garden. But in that space, the space where you are not sure if it is your garden or your neighbour's, that wild hedge that you both suspect might belong to someone else, in that space, defined by its lack of definition, that may be another matter. In the cluttered, dusty corner, the bit of unclaimed scrub, in the space formed by two buildings not quite meeting, they still are. They are the Lords of Negative Space, and they are angry. In a place we named London, there stands a hospital. How long it has stood there is a difficult thing to say, as it is a hospital built upon a hospital, built in turn around a hospital. Some of it is very new and gleaming white, but some is older, creating offices that were once tiny, cramped wards, each with their own fireplace, long since bricked up. In the basement of this hospital, in one of its basements, there is a corridor. Despite being a basement corridor, it has a window, and this window looks out onto a corner where the backs of 3 of the hospital buildings converge. On a bright day, some of the more adventurous sunlight can find its way into this forgotten corner, and when it does, it illuminates 3 walls of different style and colour. One wall, the oldest, is a crumbling facade of stone, riddled with moss that gives it a green, wet look. Jutting through it is a slightly newer red brick corner, intricately styled, almost baroque. This connects in turn to the newest wall, plain brick once painted white, but now scabby and peeling. A disused fire escape of black iron is hanging from it, leading nowhere from nowhere. That same pioneering sunlight picks out tiny motes floating in the air above a rubbish-strewn ground. They twist and move in the brief puffs of wind, Brownian motion seeming to be almost alive and dancing. The dance has an audience of 1, a young woman known to her friends as Sarah, although in point of fact her name is Gertrude Constance Zara Eugenia Fletcher. This is one of the many things she does not forgive her parents for. She stops by the window often as she goes about her business. She admires that somehow, despite the accidental nature of this place, it manages to be strangely, not quite beautiful, interesting. Nobody ever designed this place. It was certainly never intended to be studied and admired, and yet the angles of the walls, the patterns in the moss, and the stark twisted shadows cast by the fire escape combine into an asymmetric... And that is where her words run out. It is a constant source of frustration that for some reason her phone refuses to take a picture of it. She's trying again now, trying to capture the dance in stillness. But though the camera was working 5 minutes ago, for some reason, no matter how she presses the button, nothing happens. She squints at the phone, notices that it has become a little dusty, and while she can't think why that would make a difference, she nevertheless rubs it against her jeans to clean it off. There is a bright flash, and she has captured another picture of her own feet. This sort of thing has happened before, and she knows it's her cue to move on. She pockets her phone and continues along the corridor, not noticing that the dust is climbing down the leg of her jeans and scurrying back to a crack in the wall. It is raining in the conclave eternal. The rain is fine and sharp. It falls not in great scything sheets, but in gusts and patches. The walls of the place are slick with it. It coats the sinuous marble columns, making them glisten greenly. It slithers off the leaves of the ancient willows and collects in pools in the moss-covered floor. The peoples of the conclave deal with the rain in their own ways, as diverse as the people themselves. The mourn singers incorporate the rain into the tally of their woes. The leaf folk revere it, turning their face upwards. The souls of the midnight bargain offer gigantic sheltering fronds to passers-by for only the smallest of considerations. And so it goes. Some have simply decided that the rain does not apply to them and remain dry and warm amidst the downpour. One such is the prince of the conclave, a being older than time but younger than a breath. He sits atop a throne crafted of silk and skulls, one leg hooked casually over the armrest. He is a vision of languor and disinterest. He moves his head slowly to watch one figure detach itself from the throng and approach the steps of his throne. A circle of hush spreads outwards, as all pause to look at the creature who dares to stand on the lowest step of the prince's domain. It is, perhaps, the moment to describe Coldicus Mott, for his importance to this tale can hardly be denied. To our eyes he would look almost human, A short man, perhaps, and while not fat as such, there is a roundness to his frame that sets him apart from his more elegant brethren. His silvery hair is in disarray, and of such uneven lengths that it appears he was called away urgently in the middle of his last 3 haircuts. His customary cheery smile flashes in a face framed by extravagant sideburns. His clothing is equally remarkable. While there is no dress code to the conclave, Coldicus's attire could hardly be deemed appropriate. For while he is not the only one dressed in mismatched and often patched clothing, he is the only one whose clothes were not a choice, not a message to the others of the conclave. No, Coldicus's clothes are mismatched because he paid them no mind. His long green coat sports patches of red and purple. A half-eaten sandwich pokes out from a pocket. His trousers have 1 red leg and 1 blue, the latter patched in yellow, the former in a colour we have no name for. He wears only 1 glove on his left hand. It was woven from finest spider silk, and if intact, would have been a treasure indeed. But with the thumb and middle finger missing, it simply looks untidy. Only 2 items of Coldicus's attire show any sign of care. His boots, while well worn, are sturdy, polished, and intact, and the sword on his belt is pristine, even if it hangs low enough that he is in constant danger of tripping on it. Those in the crowd who recognize Mott, and there are not many, move quickly and quietly to a safe distance, but nevertheless ensure they have a good view. The little man seems suddenly aware that he has made himself the centre of attention. His smile falters, swooped downwards to a frown, before rising again, phoenix-like, to set his face alight. He spots someone he knows in the crowd, waves, and is not in the least dismayed when that person ducks back to anonymity. Coldicus bobs a series of bows before turning his gaze upwards to the prince. The little man coughs, clears his throat, and says, "My liege, I have a plan to deal with the Sarah human." A ripple of excitement passes through the crowd. That anybody should address the prince directly is unheard of. To do so in direct speech, and in a human language, no less, unthinkable. The reaction of the crowd to such an outrage runs a gamut of surprise and dismay, gasps and wails, some startled barks of anger. One of the children of Chameleon turns magenta, and then lime, then a chessboard of both before fainting dead away. 17 small rabbits and an outraged footstool materialize unbidden. But after the initial hubbub has died away, all eyes turn to the prince. He blinks, slowly, and the rain stops. He leans forward by the merest fraction, lifts 1 fingertip just a little. Encouraged, Coldicus begins to outline his plan. The girl, called Sarah by her friends, is pushing a trolley along the corridor. The trolley is old and temperamental. Its wheels drift left when they don't lock up completely. The catch on the cover sticks, and sometimes she has to hit it just so to make it release. The trolley is tired and grey, older than Sarah herself, she suspects. And it squeaks. Moving medical records around a hospital, even a noted London hospital, is not how she would choose to spend her time if she could. She tells herself the task is important. It is. Without the thoughts and judgments captured in the ink and paper that she carries, the miracle of modern healthcare would stumble, fail more often. While she does not herself heal the sick, she is part of a long chain of events that make people better. Indirectly, she and her dilapidated trolley contribute to the happiness and well-being of thousands. Still, it is a truly Sisyphean task. Find the notes, load the trolley, deliver them. Repeat. Each clinic, each day, each week. Finding the notes would be simple in theory, if everybody who moved the notes only tracked them. Instead, mundane though the task is, it is a never-ending struggle, chasing, questioning, ticking off lists. She asks the same questions of the same offenders yesterday as she will again tomorrow. Loading the trolley is her greatest satisfaction of the day, each folder in its place, neatly lined, all correct. Every one of them precisely, unequivocally in the place ordained for it. She is almost sorry when it is time to move the trolley, for she knows that once more the records will leave her control and find their way to cupboards and lockers, offices and drawers, briefcases and the back seats of consultants' cars. The wheels of the trolley stop moving. The trolley stops moving. Sarah, lost in thought, does not. Instead, she clatters into her charge, catches herself on a sharp edge, stumbles, tumbles, the trolley teeters, hanging improbably balanced on two wheels for a long moment before crashing sideways. With a bang, the cover springs open, and her precious cargo spills out, a cascade of jargon flooding the corridor. Sarah sits, winded and dumbfounded, a dull pain in her hip from the fall. Her notes, she thinks, all her work, her organisation. But this is the job, this is her time, this is why she has lists, all neatly ticked with different colour biros. This is her responsibility. She levers herself upwards and begins to restock the trolley, folder by folder, returning each one to its place. She finds the process soothing, and if she's going to be 5 minutes late to the clinic, she will deliver the notes in order and in place. She clicks her biro to the green pen, reserved for emergencies just like this, and begins a new line of ticks. She has retrieved the last of the folders from the floor, slots it neatly back into the righted trolley, ticks it, scans her list, frowns. One set of notes has no green tick. One set of notes that was on her trolley before is no longer there. She considers for a moment, perhaps she put it back without ticking it off. It doesn't sound like her, but with the corridor empty, it's the only possible choice. She counts folder spines all the same, one for each tick, no more, no fewer. She feels uneasy. Had she not found them all before she set out? Had she set off with an unfilled trolley after all? But then her gaze flicks out of her window to the strange little space that only she pays any mind to, and there, resting on the mossy ground, in amongst discarded wrappers and cans, improbably, impossibly, sits one medical record folder. She takes a step to the window, one hand to the glass, tries to make out the name or number on the cover. Is it her missing folder? She steps back and looks at the wall. There's a crack running from the window sill to the floor, but it's little more than a hairline, vertical and jagged. Nothing could slip through there, not even a sheet of paper. Certainly not a folder. She feels around the floor, no breaks or gaps. The folder cannot be her missing one. But even if it isn't, she can't leave a set of notes there. Some day someone will need them. She looks at the window again. For the first time. She's looked through it on many occasions, but never at it. The frame holds 2 panes of glass, each a little more than 2 feet wide. It was designed to open once, in an age perhaps a little less security-conscious. One half of the window meant to swing outwards, but clearly nobody has opened this window in a very long time. The cracks are painted over, the hinges unoiled. Sarah takes off the latch and gives a tentative push. The window moves, not a fraction. She presses her shoulder against the window and applies a little pressure. The window does not move. Sarah studies the thick paint jamming up the frame. She reaches an arm out to fish the keys out of her bag on the trolley. She carves a groove in the paint with her car keys, a movement made more of hope than engineering. She slings her bag around her neck and applies her shoulder to the window once more. This time she does not let up, even when it feels that the glass will surely break before the window opens. She applies all her weight against it, and suddenly the window doesn't move. Defeated, Sarah sits on the windowsill, gasping from the effort. Perhaps she will simply have to call estates and get them to fetch the folder for her. There must be a way to get in there, after all, or how did the notes get there? She leans back and does not hear the tiny tinkle of laughter as the window pops open and she tumbles backwards through it. The war that rages between the fairy and the human species is subtle and abstract, but bloody all the same. It has rarely been a battle for resources, but for minds, imagination, and the conceptual. Victories and defeats have not always been easy to tell apart, and the champions on both sides of the conflict have been largely misunderstood. The great battle prayer of the humans, for example, was used in recent generations to inflict suffering on our own young. Its true nature had been forgotten, and people had come to view it merely as a geometry textbook. Though Euclid's true purpose for collecting the elements is lost to time, it was nevertheless one of the first great victories against the Fae. Its attempt to impose order onto the way we shape our world and to give us a way to think was anathema to the fairy. That the battle prayer has fallen out of favour in our modern schools may simply be due to changes in the way we educate our young, but may in fact be the direct result of a counterstrike by the Fae. Whichever is true, it remains the case that the girl called Sarah would do well to summon its verses to mind as she stands and takes a step towards her missing folder. Since she does not, she is lost long before she realizes it. Sarah is a little surprised to find the folder still out of reach. She takes another step, and another. Surely the space she had seen through her window was small enough to cross in 3 steps, and yet the notes sit on the moss ahead, still a little out of reach. She takes a 4th step. The folder seems closer now, but still out of reach. She is unnerved, confused. The world is not behaving as it should. She almost turns to look back over her shoulder to see the window back to her world close at hand. But she dares not, as a small part of her mind, that part that remembers the dangers her ancestors faced, already knows it is too late. She shakes her head against the sudden vertigo and begins to jog forwards towards her folder. Each step seems to halve the distance to her goal, and yet half the distance still remains. The ground is uneven, rolls by under her feet. Her breath comes faster now. She breaks into a full run, bag bouncing against her back. The folder never seems to move, but she never quite reaches it. As she approaches the forest edge, she slows, stops. Her shoulders ache from the effort of not looking back. She knows. She knows. She knows that there is no forest beyond her window. She knows that the rolling hills she has crossed are not there. She knows that behind her, her window is gone. Firmly, resolutely, Sarah looks. And there is her wall. There is her window. She can see her corridor, her trolley, the rest of her notes. She's not lost at all. The way back to her world is there, just a little out of reach.
Thanks for listening to Short is the New Long. Be sure to subscribe to get the latest episodes updated every Tuesday.